The television lights were hotter than Margaret Thornhill had anticipated. At 68 years old, she'd spent a lifetime avoiding the spotlight, preferring the quiet dignity of managing her considerable fortune from behind the scenes. But today was different. Today, she stared directly into the camera lens, her spine straight as a ruler despite the arthritis that had plagued her for the past decade. "Mrs. Thornhill, you're claiming your son attempted to have you declared mentally incompetent in order to gain control of your estate, valued at approximately $75 million. Is that correct?" The interviewer, Diane Sawyer's younger, hungrier replacement, leaned forward with the practiced concern of someone who smelled ratings gold. Margaret nodded once, her silver bob swinging precisely at her jawline. "That's exactly what I'm saying, Miss Chen, and I'm here to tell America exactly how I outsmarted him." The red recording light blinked steadily, and Margaret allowed herself a small smile. Somewhere across town, her son Bradley was watching this broadcast with his mouth hanging open. The thought gave her more satisfaction than she'd felt in years. 3 months earlier, Margaret had been enjoying her morning coffee on the veranda of her Montecito estate. The gardens were in full bloom, a riot of color against the deep green of her manicured lawn. The fountain burbled pleasantly, and the ocean breeze carried the scent of jasmine. This had been her sanctuary since Robert, her husband of 42 years, had passed away 5 years ago. The gate intercom buzzed, interrupting her peaceful morning ritual. Margaret frowned. She wasn't expecting visitors, and Bradley knew better than to drop by unannounced. She'd raised him with manners, after all. Mrs. Thornhill, her housekeeper, Elena, appeared at the French doors. "There are 2 gentlemen at the gate. They say they have legal papers to deliver to you." The men who entered her home minutes later wore expensive suits and carried leather briefcases. They introduced themselves as representatives from Hadley, Price, and Winston her son's law firm. Margaret felt a flicker of unease. "Mrs. Thornhill, we're here to serve you with these documents." The taller one held out a thick manila envelope. "Your son, Bradley Thornhill, has petitioned the court for conservatorship over your estate and personal affairs, citing concerns about your cognitive capacity." Margaret's hand froze midway to the envelope. "He's done what?" "The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. You'll find all the details inside." The man's voice was professionally neutral, but Margaret detected a note of discomfort. "You'll want to secure legal representation immediately." After they left, Margaret sat in her sunroom, the unopened envelope on the table before her. The beautiful morning had turned sour, the garden colors now seeming garish rather than cheerful. Her hands trembled slightly as she finally opened the envelope and began to read. The legal language was dense, but the message was clear. Bradley claimed she was showing signs of dementia. He cited erratic financial decisions, confusion during conversations, and inability to manage daily affairs as evidence. He'd even included affidavits from her gardener and a caterer from her last charity event, claiming they'd witnessed concerning behavior. Margaret's shock gradually gave way to a cold, hard anger. She'd built Thornhill Enterprises from the ground up, alongside Robert. While he'd been the public face, she'd been the strategic mind behind their success. After his death, she'd taken full control, growing their fortune by another $20 million through careful investments and strategic philanthropy. And now her son, her only child, whom she'd put through the finest schools, whose wedding she'd funded to the tune of $300,000, whose failed business ventures she'd quietly bailed out, not once but twice was attempting to declare her incompetent. Margaret reached for her phone and called the one person she knew would give her honest counsel. "Vivian? It's Margaret. I need your help." Vivian Armstrong had been Margaret's best friend since their college days at Wellesley. Now, a retired federal judge, Vivian had a mind like a steel trap and a network that spanned the legal community. "Don't call anyone else. Don't sign anything. And Margaret, don't call Bradley." When Vivian arrived, she brought with her a younger woman with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "This is Sophia Diaz," Vivian said. "Best elder law attorney in California. She's going to help you fight this." Over the next 2 hours, The three women sat at Margaret's dining room table, dissecting Bradley's petition line by line. He's claiming you've made questionable financial decisions, Sophia noted, scanning the documents. Can you think of anything specific he might be referring to? Margaret thought for a moment. I recently liquidated some investments to fund a new wing at the children's hospital. Bradley thought it was wasteful. He wanted me to invest in his friend's tech startup instead. And these claims about confusion during conversations? I sometimes pretend not to hear him when he starts pressuring me about money, Margaret admitted with a small smile. It's a tactic I developed over the years. When Bradley starts pushing too hard, I change the subject or act slightly confused. It's easier than arguing. Vivian snorted. That's not dementia. That's strategy. It's also something he's using against you now, Sophia said grimly. What about the claim that you can't manage daily affairs? Absolute nonsense. I run this household, manage my own finances, serve on 3 boards, and still find time for my garden and book club. Margaret's voice was steady, but her hands had curled into fists on the table. When did you last have a cognitive assessment? Sophia asked. 6 months ago, during my annual physical. My doctor said I was sharp as a tack. His exact words. Sophia nodded, making notes. We'll get those records. Now, let's talk about Bradley's motivation. The petition claims he's concerned about your welfare, but what do you think is really driving this? Margaret sighed deeply. Money. It's always been about money with Bradley. He's been living beyond his means for years. His wife, Tiffany, has expensive tastes, and he's never had the discipline to tell her no. I believe he's in financial trouble again, but this time, I refused to bail him out. When was this? Vivian asked. 3 weeks ago. He came to Sunday dinner and asked for a loan of $2 million, said he had an investment opportunity that couldn't wait. I told him no. That I was tired of funding his get-rich-quick schemes. He stormed out. That was the last time I saw him. Sophia exchanged a glance with Vivian. So he files for conservatorship right after you refuse to give him money. That's not going to look good for him. But will it be enough? Margaret asked. These claims he's making, they're subjective. It's his word against mine. That's why we need to be strategic, Sophia said. A conservatorship hearing isn't just about proving you're competent, though we'll definitely do that. It's about optics and preparation. We need to demonstrate that you're not only mentally sound, but also better equipped to manage your affairs than Bradley would be. Over the next week, Margaret underwent comprehensive cognitive testing with 3 separate specialists, all of whom confirmed what she already knew. Her mind was functioning perfectly for a woman of 68. She gathered financial records, showing her prudent management of the Thornhill fortune. She collected statements from her other board members, her personal physician, and friends who interacted with her regularly. But it was during a strategy session with Sophia that the plan truly began to take shape. We have strong evidence to counter Bradley's claims, Sophia said, reviewing their files. But I'm concerned about the judge. Judge Hamilton is new to the probate division, and he tends to be cautious. He might err on the side of temporary conservatorship while ordering more evaluation. That's unacceptable, Margaret said firmly. I won't have Bradley controlling my life for even a day. Then we need leverage, Vivian interjected. Something that makes Bradley back down before the hearing. Margaret stared out the window at her garden, thinking. Bradley has always cared about appearances more than anything. His reputation, his standing in the community, these matter to him. So we threaten to make this public? Sophia asked cautiously. No, Margaret said slowly, an idea forming. We don't threaten anything. We simply let him know that I'm prepared to defend myself vigorously in whatever forum necessary. The next day, Margaret invited Bradley to lunch at the Montecito Country Club. It was a calculated choice, a public venue where he would need to maintain decorum, but private enough for a frank conversation. Bradley arrived 15 minutes late, looking irritated to have been summoned. At 45, he had Robert's height and build, but none of his warmth or integrity. His handsome features were marred by a perpetual expression of entitlement. Mother, he said, kissing her cheek perfunctorily before sitting down. "I was surprised to get your invitation." "Were you?" Margaret asked mildly, sipping her water. "I thought we should talk before things progress any further with this petition of yours." Bradley had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. "It's for your own good, Mother. I've noticed changes in your behavior. I'm worried about you." "How concerned you must be to notice these changes during your monthly visits," Margaret replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Especially when those changes became apparent immediately after I refused to give you $2 million. Bradley's face flushed. "That's unfair. This isn't about money." "Isn't it? Let's see. You claim I'm making erratic financial decisions, yet my portfolio has outperformed the market by 7% this year. You say I'm confused during conversations, yet I can recall exactly what you were wearing the last time you visited that hideous green golf shirt Tiffany bought you for Christmas. And as for being unable to manage daily affairs, I've been running circles around my personal trainer, who, by the way, is 30 years my junior." "Mother." "I'm not finished," Margaret said, her voice quiet but firm. "I've undergone cognitive testing with 3 separate specialists in the past week. All confirm what I already knew. I'm perfectly competent. I've also spoken with my financial advisors, who are prepared to testify about my sound judgment. And I've retained Sophia Diaz to represent me." Bradley paled slightly at the mention of Sophia's name. Her reputation preceded her. "I don't want to fight you, Bradley," Margaret continued. "You're my son, and despite this betrayal, I love you. But make no mistake, if you proceed with this petition, I will defend myself with every resource at my disposal. And I will win." "Oh." Bradley studied her face, seeming to truly see her for the first time in years. "You've been busy." "I've always been busy. You just never paid attention to what I was doing unless it benefited you directly." The waiter arrived with their salads, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. When he left, Bradley leaned forward. "What do you want, Mother? For me to withdraw the petition?" "That would be a start." "And in return?" Margaret smiled thinly. "In return, I won't have to explore all my options for defending myself." "Is that a threat?" Bradley studied her, calculation evident in his eyes. "I need to think about this." 3 days passed with no word from Bradley. Margaret continued her preparations with Sophia, gathering evidence and lining up witnesses. But she also set in motion another plan that Sophia didn't know about. Through Vivian's connections, Margaret arranged a meeting with Eliza Chen, the ambitious new anchor at GNN, who was always looking for compelling human interest stories. If Bradley wouldn't back down, Margaret would have her story ready to tell, complete with documentation of Bradley's failed business ventures, the money she'd loaned him over the years, and his suspicious timing in filing for conservatorship. On the 4th day after their lunch, Bradley called. "I've been thinking about our conversation," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "And?" Margaret prompted when he didn't continue. "And I've decided to withdraw the petition. My attorney will file the paperwork tomorrow." Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "That's a wise decision, Bradley. But I want to be clear, I'm still concerned about you. This isn't about money. It never was. If you're truly concerned about my welfare, there are better ways to show it than trying to take control of my life," Margaret said. "Perhaps start with more regular visits that don't involve asking for money." There was a long pause on the line. "Fine. Sunday dinners. Once a month." "That would be lovely," Margaret said, knowing it was more of a concession than Bradley had made in years. After hanging up, Margaret should have felt relieved. The immediate threat was over. Bradley had backed down. But something still bothered her: the ease with which he'd been able to begin this process, the vulnerability she'd felt when those papers were served. She thought about all the other elderly individuals, particularly women, who might face similar situations without her resources or connections. People whose children or relatives might try to seize control of their assets under the guise of concern. How many of them would be able to fight back as effectively as she had? The next day, Margaret kept her appointment with Eliza Chen. I understand your son has withdrawn the petition, Eliza said, looking slightly disappointed as they sat in her office. Does that mean you no longer want to tell your story? On the contrary, Margaret replied. I think it's more important than ever, but I want to broaden the scope. This isn't just about me and Bradley. It's about elder rights, about autonomy, about the way our society too often dismisses the capabilities of older people, especially women. Eliza's eyes lit up. A special report on elder rights, featuring your experience as a case study? That could work. I have one condition, Margaret said. I want to announce the establishment of a new foundation, the Thornhill Elder Justice Initiative. I'm committing $20 million to provide legal assistance to older adults facing guardianship and conservatorship challenges. And that was how, 3 weeks later, Margaret found herself under the bright lights of a television studio, telling her story to millions of viewers. She described Bradley's petition, her fight to maintain her independence, and her new mission to help others in similar situations. Mrs. Thornhill, what would you say to other older Americans who might be facing challenges to their autonomy? Eliza asked, as the interview neared its conclusion. Margaret looked directly into the camera, imagining Bradley watching from his living room. I would tell them that age is not a disability. Experience is not a weakness. We've spent decades developing wisdom, judgment, and resilience. Don't let anyone convince you that you're less capable simply because you've lived longer. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. And to the family members who might be considering taking control of an elder's affairs, ask yourself honestly, is this about their welfare? Or is it about your desires? Because if it's the latter, know this. We may be older, but we're not powerless. We've survived and thrived for decades. Underestimate us at your peril. As the red recording light blinked off, Margaret felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd experienced since Robert's death. This fight with Bradley had awakened something in her recognition that her wealth and influence could serve a greater purpose than simply providing comfort in her later years. The battle for her autonomy was won, but the war for elder justice was just beginning. And Margaret Thornhill was ready to lead the charge. The day after her television appearance, Margaret's phone wouldn't stop ringing. Her interview had struck a nerve across the country, resonating with older Americans who had faced similar challenges and younger viewers shocked by the vulnerability of the elderly, even wealthy ones to financial exploitation. Mrs. Thornhill, your breakfast is getting cold, Elena said, poking her head into Margaret's study where she'd been fielding calls since 6 in the morning. Margaret ended her call with a reporter from the Wall Street Journal and made her way to the sunroom where her usual breakfast awaited: poached eggs, whole grain toast, and fresh berries. As she ate, she scrolled through the hundreds of emails that had flooded her inbox overnight. Most were supportive, sharing personal stories of elder abuse or offering to volunteer for her new foundation. Some were from attorneys specializing in elder law, offering their services. A few were angry messages from adult children who felt personally attacked by her statements. One email in particular caught her attention. It was from a woman named Dorothy Simmons in Phoenix, Arizona. Dear Mrs. Thornhill, it read, I watched your interview last night and couldn't stop crying. My daughter and son-in-law have been trying to take control of my modest savings for 2 years. Unlike you, I don't have millions to fight them with. I'm 73 and terrified of becoming homeless. Is your foundation real? Or was that just something you said on television? Because if it's real, I desperately need help. Margaret set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. Dorothy's email crystallized exactly why she'd gone public with her story. She immediately forwarded the message to Sophia with a note. Our first case. Please contact her today. Just as she finished, her doorbell rang. Elena appeared moments later with a large bouquet of white lilies. These just arrived for you, she said, setting them on the table. Margaret opened the small card tucked among the blooms. Congratulations on your television debut. You were magnificent. Lunch today? Vivian. Margaret smiled and texted her friend to confirm. Vivian had been her rock through this entire ordeal, and she was eager to share the response her interview was generating. As she was about to return to her breakfast, her phone rang again. This time, it was Bradley. Margaret took a deep breath before answering. "Good morning, Bradley." "What the hell was that?" His voice was tight with anger. "You promised if I withdrew the petition, you wouldn't go public." "I made no such promise," Margaret replied calmly. "I said I wouldn't have to explore all my options for defending myself. Once you withdrew the petition, I was no longer defending myself against you. I was advocating for others." "Semantics! You humiliated me on national television." "I never mentioned your name, Bradley." "You didn't have to. Everyone in my circle knows it was me. I've received dozens of texts since last night. My phone is blowing up with people asking if I tried to steal my mother's money." Margaret sighed. "That's not what I said, and you know it. I spoke about my experience and announced my foundation. If people are making connections, perhaps that says more about your reputation than my interview." "This is exactly the kind of manipulative behavior I was concerned about," Bradley snapped. "You twist everything to make yourself the victim." "I'm not a victim, Bradley. That's the entire point. I'm a capable woman who defended herself against an unjust attack on her autonomy. And now I'm helping others do the same." There was a long pause on the line. When Bradley spoke again, his voice had changed. It was softer, more calculated. "Mother, I'm worried about you. This sudden need for publicity, this rash decision to give away $20 million, these aren't the actions of the private, prudent woman who raised me." Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. She recognized this tone. It was the same one he'd used when explaining to his father why another business venture had failed, or when convincing her to write yet another check to cover his mistakes. "Bradley, don't try to spin this into evidence of mental decline. It won't work." "I'm just concerned," he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Starting a foundation is a complex undertaking. The legal requirements, the tax implications. Have you really thought this through? Or was this a spontaneous decision made under the emotional stress of our disagreement?" Margaret's grip tightened on her phone. The Thornhill Elder Justice Initiative has been in development for 3 weeks, with input from legal and financial experts. The paperwork was filed last week. The initial funding is in an escrow account, pending approval of our 501(3) status. Does that sound spontaneous to you? Another pause. "You've been planning this for 3 weeks? Since right after our lunch?" "I've been considering some form of elder advocacy work for years," Margaret said. "Our conflict simply crystallized the specific need. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a busy day ahead." After hanging up, Margaret sat still for a long moment, processing the conversation. Bradley's quick pivot from anger to concern was troubling. He was smart enough to realize that direct confrontation wouldn't work, so he was shifting tactics, trying to frame her actions as evidence of the very instability he'd initially claimed. She would need to be careful, very careful. At noon, Margaret met Vivian at La Maison, an upscale French bistro they both loved. Vivian was already seated at their usual corner table, a glass of Sancerre in hand. "There she is, GNN's newest star." Vivian stood to embrace Margaret. At 70, Vivian was tall and striking, with short silver hair and the commanding presence developed during decades on the federal bench. "Hardly," Margaret laughed, taking her seat, "though my phone hasn't stopped ringing since the interview aired." "I'm not surprised. You were compelling, Margaret. Dignified but forceful. You put a face on an issue many people don't think about until it affects them personally." The waiter appeared, and Margaret ordered a sparkling water with lime. Since Bradley's petition, she'd stopped drinking alcohol entirely, not because it affected her significantly, but because she didn't want to give him any ammunition, however slight. "Bradley called this morning," Margaret said once the waiter had gone. "He was furious about the interview." "I imagine he was," Vivian replied dryly. "Nothing worse than being publicly called out for bad behavior, even if you weren't named explicitly." "It wasn't just anger, though. He quickly shifted to concern about my mental state, suggesting that starting the foundation was impulsive and irrational. Vivian's expression darkened. He's laying groundwork for another petition. That's what I thought. But surely he wouldn't try again so soon? Maybe not immediately, but he's keeping his options open, creating a narrative he can use later. Margaret nodded slowly. I need to be strategic about my next steps. More than strategic, Vivian said, leaning forward. You need to be proactive. Document everything. Record your calls with Bradley, if that's legal in your state. Keep detailed notes of your activities and decisions. Create a paper trail that proves your competence beyond any doubt. I've already started, Margaret said. Sophia suggested the same thing. Good. And speaking of Sophia, how's the foundation coming along? Margaret brightened. We've already identified our first Cassia woman in Arizona whose daughter is trying to take control of her savings. And we've received over 50 more requests for help since last night. You're going to need staff, Vivian observed. Attorneys, case managers, administrators. We're working on it. I have a meeting with a nonprofit consultant tomorrow to discuss organizational structure. Margaret paused as their salads arrived. Vivian, I want to ask you something important. Anything. Would you consider chairing the foundation's board? Your legal expertise and reputation would be invaluable. And frankly, I trust you more than anyone else in my life right now. Vivian smiled warmly. I'd be honored, though I should warn you I run a tight ship in the boardroom. That's exactly why I want you, Margaret replied. This foundation needs to be beyond reproach. Bradley and others like him will be looking for any sign of mismanagement or poor judgment. As they ate, they discussed potential board members, mission parameters, and immediate priorities for the foundation. By the time they finished their meal, they had outlined a robust plan for the organization's first 6 months. One more thing, Vivian said as they waited for the check. Have you spoken with Tiffany since all this began? Margaret shook her head. No. Bradley and I have never discussed his marriage problems with me. Marriage problems? Vivian raised an eyebrow. They've been struggling for years, Margaret said. Bradley thinks I don't notice. But a mother always knows. The way they barely look at each other at family gatherings, the separate vacations, the tense undercurrent whenever money is mentioned. Do you think Tiffany was behind the conservatorship attempt? Margaret considered this. I don't know. Bradley has always been driven by his own desires, but Tiffany certainly enjoys the lifestyle my money provides by proxy. She's never shown much interest in me personally. It might be worth reaching out to her, Vivian suggested. Sometimes the spouse has a different perspective, and if there are marital issues, she might be more willing to share information about Bradley's true motivations. The idea hadn't occurred to Margaret. Her relationship with her daughter-in-law had always been cordial but distant. Tiffany was 38, a former model who'd met Bradley at a charity gala 12 years ago. She was beautiful and socially adept, but there had always been a calculation behind her smile that made Margaret wary. That evening, after a long day of meetings and phone calls, Margaret sat in her study reviewing the foundation's draft bylaws. The house was quiet, Elena having gone home hours ago. Outside, the sun was setting over the Pacific, casting long shadows across her garden. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an unknown number. Margaret stared at the message, surprised by the timing after her conversation with Vivian. She hesitated before responding. Of course. When and where would you like to meet? 9 a.m.? I'd rather Bradley not know about this. Margaret agreed. Her curiosity piqued. What could Tiffany possibly want to tell her that required such secrecy? The next morning, Margaret arrived at the coffee shop 10 minutes early. Lilac, Honey was a charming spot, tucked away on a side street with a garden patio sheltered by trellises covered in flowering vines. She chose a table in the corner of the patio, partially screened by potted plants but with a clear view of the entrance. At precisely 9, Tiffany walked in. She was as stunning as ever in slim white jeans and a blue silk blouse, her blonde hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. She scanned the patio, spotted Margaret, and made her way over. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the chair opposite Margaret. Up close, Margaret could see the careful makeup covering dark circles under Tiffany's eyes. "Your message intrigued me," Margaret replied. "What's this about, Tiffany?" A server approached, and Tiffany ordered an oat milk latte. Margaret asked for Earl Grey tea. When they were alone again, Tiffany leaned forward. "I want to apologize," she said quietly, "for Bradley's behavior, and for not stopping him." Margaret studied her daughter-in-law's face, looking for signs of insincerity. She found none. "You knew about the petition?" Tiffany nodded. "He discussed it with me beforehand. I told him it was a terrible idea, that it would backfire. But Bradley doesn't listen to me anymore." "Why are you telling me this now?" Tiffany glanced around before answering, as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Because I saw your interview, and it made me realize how wrong this all is. And because—" she hesitated. "Because I'm filing for divorce, and I don't want you to think I was part of his scheme." Margaret sat back, surprised by Tiffany's candor. "I'm sorry to hear about the divorce." "Don't be. It's been coming for years. Bradley isn't the man I thought I married. He's become obsessed with money, with status. Nothing is ever enough." Their drinks arrived, creating a brief pause in the conversation. Margaret added a splash of milk to her tea, using the moment to gather her thoughts. "Tiffany, I appreciate your apology, but I have to ask, what do you hope to gain from this meeting? If you're divorcing Bradley, you must know that I have no influence over the settlement." Tiffany's face flushed. "That's not why I'm here. I genuinely felt bad about what happened. And—" she took a deep breath. "And I thought you should know that Bradley isn't giving up." Margaret's hand froze with her teacup halfway to her lips. "What do you mean?" "He was furious about your TV appearance. He spent hours on the phone with his lawyer afterward. I overheard parts of the conversation. They're looking for a different angle to challenge your competency." "What angle?" "I don't know the details, but I heard him mention something about your charitable donations, questioning your financial judgment." Tiffany looked genuinely troubled. "Margaret, he's desperate. The truth is, we're in serious financial trouble." "How serious?" "Millions in debt. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. Bradley made some bad investments, borrowed against future earnings that never materialized." Tiffany twisted her diamond wedding ring nervously. "That's why he needed the $2 million he asked you for. It wasn't for an investment opportunity. It was to keep the creditors at bay." Margaret absorbed this information, her mind racing. "And now that I've refused, and publicly announced a $20 million foundation." "He's panicking," Tiffany confirmed. "He sees that money as his inheritance slipping away." "It was never guaranteed to be his inheritance," Margaret said firmly. "Robert and I always believed in using our wealth for good, not just passing it along to the next generation. Bradley has been recording your conversations. Every phone call. Every in-person meeting for the past month. He's trying to catch you saying something he can use against you." Margaret felt a chill despite the warm morning sun. "Thank you for telling me this, Tiffany. I appreciate your honesty." Tiffany nodded, looking both relieved and sad. "I should have spoken up sooner. But Bradley can be persuasive and intimidating when he doesn't get his way." Something in Tiffany's tone made Margaret look more closely at her daughter-in-law. "Tiffany, has Bradley ever been physically intimidating with you?" Tiffany's eyes dropped to her latte. "Not physically, no. But emotionally, psychologically, yes. It's been a slow erosion over years. I barely recognize myself anymore." Margaret reached across the table and squeezed Tiffany's hand. "I'm sorry. I should have seen it." "How could you? We present the perfect couple in public. I've become an expert at smiling through the tension." Tiffany squeezed back before withdrawing her hand. "I should go. Bradley thinks I'm at a Pilates class." As Tiffany stood to leave, Margaret asked one final question. "What will you do now?" "Finish the divorce. Start over. I put my modeling career on hold for Bradley. Maybe it's time to see what opportunities are still out there for a 38-year-old has-been." She attempted a smile that didn't reach her eyes. If you need anything. I won't ask for money, Tiffany interrupted. That's not why I came. I was going to say, if you need a reference or a connection in the industry, I know people. Margaret had served on the board of a major fashion foundation for years and maintained many contacts. Surprise flickered across Tiffany's face, followed by genuine gratitude. Thank you. That's incredibly kind, considering everything. After Tiffany left, Margaret remained at the table, processing their conversation. Bradley was more desperate than she'd realized. And now she knew he was recording their interactions, looking for ammunition. She pulled out her phone and texted Sophia, "Need to meet ASAP, new developments with Bradley." Then she called Vivian. "He's recording me," she said when Vivian answered. "Bradley's recording our conversations, looking for evidence of incompetence." That manipulative little, Vivian caught herself. "How did you find out?" "Tiffany told me. We just had coffee. She's divorcing him and wanted to warn me that he's not giving up on getting control of my money." "Interesting timing," Vivian said. "Do you trust her?" "I'm not sure," Margaret admitted. But her information aligns with Bradley's behavior, and she seemed genuinely remorseful about not stopping him earlier. "Well, if he's recording you, we need to be 2 steps ahead. From now on, all your conversations with Bradley should happen with Sophia or me present. And we should consider whether to file for a restraining order." "A restraining order seems extreme," Margaret protested. "He's still my son. A son who's actively trying to strip you of your autonomy." Vivian reminded her. "Margaret, you need to protect yourself. Bradley has shown he's willing to use the legal system against you. We need to be prepared to use it to defend you." As she drove home, Margaret's thoughts turned to Robert. What would he think of their son now? Robert had always been proud of Bradley's charm and ambition, even when Margaret had seen the shadows beneath the entitlement, the lack of empathy, the shortcuts. "He'll grow out of it," Robert used to say. "He just needs to find his purpose." But Bradley was 45 now, and he hadn't grown out of anything. If anything, his worst qualities had intensified with age. For the first time, Margaret allowed herself to consider a painful possibility, that she might need to cut ties with her only child. The thought brought a physical ache to her chest. Despite everything, she loved Bradley. He was her son, her flesh and blood, the baby she had cradled and the boy she had raised. But he had declared war on her. And in war, there were casualties, including, perhaps, the relationship between mother and son. The Thornhill Elder Justice Initiative launched officially 3 weeks after Margaret's television interview. The foundation's headquarters occupied the entire 10th floor of a sleek office building in downtown Santa Barbara, with views of the mountains on one side and the Pacific Ocean on the other. Margaret had spared no expense in creating a welcoming environment for both staff and clients. On opening day, Margaret stood in the reception area, surveying the space with pride. The walls were painted in soothing sage green, adorned with artwork from local senior artists. Comfortable seating areas featured ergonomic furniture, designed with older bodies in mind. Private consultation rooms ensured confidentiality for clients discussing sensitive matters. "It's perfect," Vivian said, joining Margaret by the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Professional, but not intimidating." "That was exactly my goal," Margaret replied. "We want clients to feel safe here, especially since many will be in vulnerable positions when they come to us." Sophia approached, tablet in hand. "The press will be arriving in 30 minutes. Are you ready for your statement?" Margaret nodded. She'd prepared carefully for this moment, working with a public relations consultant to craft messaging that would focus on the foundation's mission rather than her personal story. Today wasn't about Bradley. It was about launching an organization that would help countless others. "Bradley filed a complaint with the State Bar Association against me yesterday." Margaret's eyes widened. "On what grounds?" "That's absurd," Vivian interjected. "You were representing Margaret before the foundation was even conceived." "It's a nuisance complaint," Sophia agreed. "It won't go anywhere, but it's a clear attempt to discredit both me and the foundation before we even open our doors." Margaret felt a familiar anger rising. He's trying to undermine everything we're building. Yes, but he won't succeed, Sophia assured her. I've already submitted a comprehensive response to the bar, and frankly, this kind of petty attack only makes him look worse. Should we postpone the press conference? Margaret asked. Absolutely not, Vivian said firmly. That's exactly what he wants to disrupt our momentum. We proceed as planned, and if anyone asks about the complaint, we have a simple response. This is a baseless allegation that we believe is motivated by personal animus rather than legitimate concerns. We're focusing on our mission to help vulnerable elders. Margaret nodded, squaring her shoulders. You're right. We won't let Bradley derail us. The press conference went smoothly. Margaret delivered her prepared remarks with poise, emphasizing the Foundation's three core services: legal representation for elders facing guardianship challenges, education for older adults about their rights, and advocacy for policy changes to strengthen protections against elder exploitation. She introduced the Foundation's impressive board of directors, which included Vivian, 2 geriatric physicians, a retired state Supreme Court justice, and the former head of a national aging advocacy organization. She also announced that the Foundation had already taken on 15 cases across 5 states. No one asked about Bradley or his bar complaint against Sophia. The questions instead focused on the Foundation's selection criteria for cases, its long-term funding strategy, and plans for expanding services nationally. As the event concluded, Margaret felt a sense of accomplishment wash over her. This was bigger than her conflict with Bradley now. She was creating a legacy that would outlast both of them. Her satisfaction was short-lived. That evening, as she prepared for a small celebration dinner with the board, her phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Thornhill, this is Detective Rivera with the Santa Barbara Police Department. I'm calling regarding a complaint we've received about potential elder financial abuse. Margaret sat down heavily on her bedroom chair. I beg your pardon? We've received an anonymous tip suggesting that you may be the victim of financial exploitation by individuals who have recently gained influence over you. That's preposterous, Margaret said, her voice steady despite her shock. I'm not being exploited by anyone. I understand this must be concerning, ma'am. These situations are often complex, and victims may not recognize what's happening. Would you be willing to come to the station tomorrow to discuss the matter? You're welcome to bring an attorney. I am not a victim. I am a 68-year-old woman in full possession of my faculties who has chosen to establish a charitable foundation with my own money. This anonymous tip undoubtedly came from my son, who has been trying to gain control of my finances for months. There was a pause on the line. Ma'am, I'm not at liberty to disclose the source of the complaint, but I am obligated to investigate all reports of elder abuse. I understand you're doing your job, Margaret said, softening her tone. And I will cooperate fully. What time would you like me to come in tomorrow? They arranged a meeting for 10 the next morning. As soon as the call ended, Margaret phoned Sophia and explained the situation. This is escalating faster than I anticipated, Sophia said, concern evident in her voice. Bradley's moving on multiple fronts. Simultaneously the bar complaint against me, now a police report alleging exploitation. He's trying to create a paper trail that suggests you're being taken advantage of. What's next? Adult Protective Services showing up at my door? Actually, yes. That could be his next move. We need to get ahead of this, Margaret. I think it's time we go on the offensive. What do you suggest? We've been playing defense, responding to Bradley's attacks. But we have something he doesn't know about: Tiffany's statement about his financial motivations and his recording of your conversations without consent. I'm not sure I want to use that, Margaret said hesitantly. Despite everything, he's still my son. Margaret, Sophia said gently. Bradley stopped acting like your son the moment he tried to take away your autonomy. He's treating you as an adversary, and we need to respond accordingly. After a long pause, Margaret sighed. You're right. What's our next step? We'll also mention Bradley's request for $2 million right before filing the petition. And after that? We consider filing for a restraining order to prevent Bradley from making further false reports. And we might want to think about a civil suit for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. A lawsuit against my own son, Margaret said quietly. I never imagined it would come to this. I hope it doesn't, Sophia replied. Sometimes the threat of legal action is enough to make someone back down. But we need to be prepared for all possibilities. The meeting with Detective Rivera the next morning went better than expected. He was a thoughtful man in his 50s who listened carefully as Margaret and Sophia presented their evidence of Bradley's pattern of behavior. So your position is that this report is essentially retaliation for your refusal to give your son money, and for establishing a foundation that reduces his potential inheritance? The detective summarized. Exactly, Margaret confirmed. My son has been trying to portray me as incompetent since I refused his request for $2 million 3 months ago. First through a conservatorship petition, which he withdrew when challenged, and now through these false reports of exploitation. Detective Rivera made notes in his file. Mrs. Thornhill, based on our conversation and the documentation you've provided, I don't see evidence of you being exploited. You appear to be making informed decisions about your own resources. Thank you, Detective. That said, I am concerned about this escalating family conflict. These situations can sometimes turn volatile. We're considering legal options to prevent further false reports, Sophia interjected. If you receive any threatening communications from your son, please don't hesitate to contact us again. As they left the police station, Margaret felt both relieved and saddened. Another confrontation navigated successfully, but at what cost to her relationship with Bradley? What now? She asked Sophia as they walked to their cars. Now we prepare for Bradley's next move, Sophia replied. And we consider making one of our own. Later that afternoon, Margaret sat in Vivian's home office with Sophia and a digital forensics expert named Marcus Chen. The room was lined with legal books and family photos, a testament to Vivian's dual identities as judge and grandmother. So you believe Bradley has been recording our conversations without my knowledge or consent? Margaret asked Marcus. He nodded. Based on the information Ms. Diaz shared with me, it seems likely. California is a two-party consent state, meaning it's illegal to record conversations without the knowledge and permission of all parties involved. Can we prove he's been doing this? Possibly. If he's storing these recordings on his phone or computer, and if we can legally gain access to those devices through discovery in a civil suit, we could potentially find evidence. And if we do? Margaret asked. Recording someone without consent in California is both a criminal offense and grounds for a civil lawsuit, Sophia explained. It could result in fines, potentially even jail time in extreme cases, though that's unlikely for a first offense. I don't want Bradley to go to jail, Margaret said quickly. I just want him to stop attacking me. The threat of criminal charges might be enough to achieve that, Vivian pointed out. Bradley values his reputation. A criminal record would damage that significantly. Margaret considered this, turning the heavy crystal paperweight on Vivian's desk absently in her hands. What about the foundation? Could these attacks affect our work? They could create distractions, Sophia acknowledged. But they could also generate sympathy and support if handled correctly. People don't like seeing an elderly mother harassed by her greedy son. I hate that characterization, Margaret sighed. Bradley wasn't always like this. He was a sweet child, sensitive and creative. Somewhere along the way, he changed. People reveal their true character when money is involved, Vivian said gently. Perhaps this is who Bradley has always been, but circumstances never brought it to the surface until now. The next day, Margaret received an unexpected visitor at the foundation offices. She was reviewing case files when her assistant buzzed the intercom. James Thornhill here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important. Margaret froze. James Thornhill was Bradley's 19-year-old son from his first Miraja brief union that had ended when James was just a toddler. Bradley had maintained minimal contact with the boy over the years, paying child support but rarely participating in his life. Margaret had tried to maintain a relationship with her grandson, sending birthday and Christmas gifts, attending his high school graduation. But the geographical distance James lived in Chicago with his mother had made it difficult. "Please send him in," Margaret said, quickly tidying the papers on her desk. James entered hesitantly. He had grown since Margaret had last seen him at his graduation a year ago, now standing over 6 feet tall. He had Bradley's jawline but softer eyes, more like Robert's, Margaret thought with a pang. "Grandma Margaret," he said, hovering awkwardly by the door. "I hope it's okay that I stopped by." "James, of course it is." Margaret rose and crossed the room to embrace him. "What a wonderful surprise. What brings you to California?" I saw your interview on GNN," he said, returning her hug before stepping back. "And then I read about your foundation online. I thought maybe I could help." Margaret gestured for him to sit on the small sofa in her office. "Help? In what way?" James sat, his long legs bent awkwardly, hands clasped between his knees. "I'm studying pre-law at Northwestern. I could intern here maybe? Learn about elder law while helping with cases?" Margaret studied her grandson's face, touched by his offer, but sensing there was more to his visit. "That's a wonderful idea, James. We're actually developing an internship program. But I have a feeling that's not the only reason you flew across the country." James looked down at his hands. "No, it's not." He took a deep breath. "I know what Dad is doing to you. Mom told me about the conservatorship thing, and then I saw some of his texts to his lawyer on his phone when I visited him last month." "You saw texts about me?" Margaret asked, surprised. James nodded, his expression troubled. "Dad doesn't know I saw them. He left his phone unlocked when he went to take a call on the house line. I wasn't snooping exactly, but a message preview popped up with your name, so I looked." "What did it say, James?" "Dad's been recording your conversations for months." Margaret nodded slowly. "We suspected as much. It's worse than that. He has a whole file of edited clips, things you've said, taken out of context to make you sound confused or irrational. He played some of them for me, trying to convince me you're not well." Margaret felt a chill run through her. "Edited recordings?" "Yeah, he has this software that lets him splice audio files together. He's creating a narrative that you're declining mentally." James looked genuinely distressed. "I knew it wasn't right. The grandmother I know is sharp as a tack, always has been. Thank you for telling me this, James. It can't be easy to share these things about your father." "Dad and I have never been close," James said with a shrug that didn't quite hide his hurt. "He's always been too busy with his new family, with Tiffany and their social circle. I was just the child support payment that cut into his lifestyle." Margaret reached out and squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry, James. I should have done more to keep you connected to our family. Dad is planning to file a new conservatorship petition next week. He has a different judge lined up, someone he thinks will be more sympathetic, and he's going to use these edited recordings as evidence." Margaret sat back, processing this information. "James, would you be willing to make a formal statement about what you've seen and heard? It would help us prepare a defense. It's not right, what he's doing. It may create a permanent rift between you and your father," Margaret warned. "Are you prepared for that?" James gave a sad smile. "What rift? We've never had a real relationship to break." After James left, promising to return the next day to meet with Sophia and provide a formal statement, Margaret sat alone in her office, turning over this new information. Bradley had stooped to manipulating audio recordings, to presenting a false narrative about her mental state. And he was preparing another legal attack, even after his first attempt had failed so publicly. She picked up her phone and called Vivian. "Bradley's been editing our recorded conversations to make me sound impaired," she said without preamble when Vivian answered. "And he's planning to file a new conservatorship petition next week with a different judge." "How do you know this?" Vivian asked, her voice sharp with concern. "James just visited me. Bradley's son from his first marriage. He saw texts on Bradley's phone and heard the edited recordings." "Is he willing to testify to this?" "Yes. He's meeting with Sophia tomorrow to make a formal statement. There was a pause, as Vivian considered. This changes things, Margaret. Editing recordings to present false evidence to a court isn't just unethical, it's potentially criminal. This goes beyond family squabbling into fraud territory. What should we do? We need to move first, before his petition is filed. I think it's time for that restraining order we discussed, and possibly an injunction to prevent him from using illegally obtained and falsified recordings. And if that doesn't stop him? Then we consider more serious measures. Margaret, manipulating evidence for a court proceeding is fraud. If Bradley files those doctored recordings as evidence, he could face criminal charges. Margaret closed her eyes, the weight of the situation settling heavily on her shoulders. I never wanted it to come to this. I know, Vivian said gently. But remember, Bradley is making these choices, not you. You're simply protecting yourself. After ending the call, Margaret sat at her desk for a long time, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. She thought about Bradley as a child, his small hand in hers as they walked along this same coastline. She remembered teaching him to build sandcastles, to fly kites, to ride a bike. Where had that little boy gone? When had he transformed into this man who would falsify evidence to take control of her money? Her phone buzzed with a text from Bradley himself. Mother, we need to talk. Dinner tomorrow? Just the two of us. Margaret stared at the message, wondering what new tactic this represented. Was he hoping to record more conversation to manipulate? Or was this a genuine attempt to resolve their conflict? Either way, she knew she couldn't meet him alone, not now that she knew the extent of his deception. I'm sorry, Bradley, but I don't think that's a good idea right now, she replied. If you want to meet, it will need to be with our respective attorneys present. His response came quickly. Why? Are you afraid to face me without your attack dogs? This is family business, not a legal negotiation. You made it legal business when you filed for conservatorship, she typed back, and when you began recording our conversations without my consent. There was a long pause before his next message appeared. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. And I know about the edited recordings, Bradley. Did you really think no one would discover what you're doing? Another pause, longer this time. Then, who's been feeding you these paranoid ideas? This is exactly why I'm concerned about you, Mother. You're becoming suspicious and irrational. Margaret felt a surge of anger. Even when confronted directly, he was gaslighting her, trying to make her doubt her own perceptions. Bradley, I have evidence of what you've been doing. Concrete evidence. I'm giving you one chance to stop this destructive path before it causes irreparable damage to our family. Drop your plans for a new petition. Stop the false reports. Let's find a way forward that doesn't involve courts and lawyers. I'm trying to protect you from people who are clearly manipulating you into giving away our family's money. Our family's money? Margaret typed, her fingers moving rapidly now. This is my money, Bradley. Money that Robert and I earned through decades of hard work. Money that I have every right to allocate as I see fit. Your inheritance is not guaranteed, nor is it your entitlement. We'll see what the court has to say about that, came his reply. Clearly you're not willing to be reasonable. Margaret set down her phone, a strange calm settling over her. Bradley had just confirmed everything James had told her. He was indeed planning another legal challenge, and he clearly felt confident about his chances of success. It was time to stop hoping for reconciliation and start preparing for war. The next morning, Margaret met with Sophia, Vivian, and James in the Foundation's conference room. James provided a detailed statement about the edited recordings and Bradley's plans, which Sophia recorded and had transcribed officially. Based on this new information, Sophia said, I recommend we take immediate legal action. We should file for a temporary restraining order to prevent Bradley from submitting any recordings of you to the court, and we should seek an emergency hearing to present evidence of his intent to submit falsified materials. I agree, Vivian said. We also need to notify the potential new judge about this situation before Bradley files his petition. Judges don't appreciate being manipulated, and forewarning the court about potentially fraudulent evidence would be appropriate given what we now know. Margaret nodded, her resolve strengthening. Let's do it. And I want to take one more step. I want to go public with this new information. Your relationship with Bradley may never recover. And going public serves two purposes. It further protects me by putting Bradley's actions in the spotlight. And it raises awareness about the lengths to which some family members will go to control an elder's assets. That awareness is central to our foundation's mission. If you're certain, Sophia said. I can arrange another interview with Eliza Chen. She's been requesting a follow-up since your foundation launched. Do it, Margaret said. But this time, I want to be very specific about what Bradley has done. No more protecting him by speaking in generalities. The world should know exactly what he's been willing to do for money. As the meeting concluded, James approached his grandmother. I'm proud of you, Grandma. Standing up to Dad like this can't be easy. Margaret embraced her grandson, feeling a surge of gratitude for his support. Thank you for your courage, James. Your grandfather would have been so proud of the man you're becoming. I wish I'd known him better, James said wistfully. He would have loved the person you are now, Margaret assured him, and so do I. As James left for his hotel, promising to return for dinner, Margaret turned to Vivian. Are we doing the right thing? Taking this public? Potentially destroying my relationship with Bradley permanently? Margaret nodded, squaring her shoulders. Then let's proceed. It's time Bradley learned that I won't be bullied or manipulated by him or anyone else. The GNN studio was even more intimidating the second time around. Margaret sat perfectly still as the makeup artist made final touches, her mind racing with all that had transpired in the 72 hours since their meeting with James. Sophia had worked at lightning speed, filing for an emergency temporary restraining order against Bradley to prevent him from using any recordings in court proceedings. The judge had granted it immediately upon reviewing James's sworn statement about the edited audio files. Bradley, served with the restraining order at his office, had erupted in a fury that required security to escort him from the building. He'd called Margaret repeatedly, leaving increasingly hostile voicemails that only strengthened her case against him. 2 minutes, Mrs. Thornhill, a production assistant said, adjusting Margaret's microphone. Across from her, Eliza Chen reviewed her notes one last time. Remember, she said quietly. We'll start with a brief recap of the previous situation, then move directly into these new developments. Take your time with your responses. This interview will likely be viewed by millions. Margaret nodded, her throat suddenly dry. She was about to publicly accuse her only son of fabricating evidence to seize control of her fortune. There would be no going back from this moment. And we're live in 5, 4, 3. The floor director silently counted down the final 2 seconds. Good evening. I'm Eliza Chen, and tonight we have an exclusive follow-up interview with Margaret Thornhill, whose story of fighting her son's attempt to declare her incompetent captured national attention 2 months ago. Mrs. Thornhill, thank you for joining us again. Thank you for having me, Eliza. When we last spoke, you had successfully defeated your son's petition for conservatorship and launched the Thornhill Elder Justice Initiative. Many viewers might have assumed that was the end of the story. But you're here tonight with disturbing new allegations. Can you tell us what's been happening? Margaret took a deep breath. My son Bradley has escalated his attempts to gain control of my finances. We've discovered that he's been secretly recording our conversations for months, then editing those recordings to make me sound confused or irrational. He planned to submit these doctored recordings as evidence in a new conservatorship petition. Eliza's eyes widened with practiced shock. That's an extraordinary allegation. How did you discover this? My grandson, Bradley's son from his first marriage, saw text messages on Bradley's phone discussing these edited recordings. He also heard some of the manipulated audio files himself and has provided a sworn statement to that effect. And how have you responded to this discovery? My legal team has obtained an emergency restraining order preventing Bradley from using any recordings in court proceedings. We're also considering further legal action regarding the creation of falsified evidence. Mrs. Thornhill, Many viewers might be wondering why your son would go to such extreme lengths. In your view, what's motivating these actions? Money? Plain and simple, Margaret said, her voice steady. Bradley has significant financial problems that I only recently became aware of. He initially asked me for a loan of $2 million, which I refused. Shortly after that refusal, he filed the first conservatorship petition. When that failed, and when I announced the foundation that would direct $20 million to helping other elders, he became desperate. Eliza leaned forward. You're essentially accusing your son of attempting to defraud both you and the court system to gain control of your fortune. These are serious allegations that could have criminal implications. Are you prepared for the potential consequences this interview might have on your relationship with Bradley? Margaret met Eliza's gaze directly. My relationship with Bradley may already be beyond repair. No mother wants to believe her child would betray her this way. I've spent months trying to understand his actions, making excuses, hoping for reconciliation. But at some point, I had to accept the reality of who my son has become. And what reality is that? That Bradley values money more than family, that he's willing to portray his own mother as mentally incompetent to gain control of her assets, that he would create false evidence to achieve his goals. Margaret paused, emotion briefly overtaking her. It's a painful reality to accept, but continuing to deny it would only make me truly vulnerable. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, with Margaret providing specific details about Bradley's actions and the foundation's growing work. As they neared the conclusion, Eliza asked one final question. Mrs. Thornhill, what message do you have for other older Americans who might be facing similar situations with family members? Margaret thought carefully before answering. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Document everything. Build a support network of friends, professionals, and organizations like ours who can help. And remember that age doesn't diminish your right to autonomy and respect. She paused, then added, and to the adult children watching, your parents' money is not your inheritance until they choose to make it so. They earned it, they have the right to spend it, donate it, or preserve it as they see fit. True family bonds are built on love and respect, not financial expectations. As the camera stopped rolling, Margaret exhaled slowly, feeling both drained and somehow lighter. The truth was finally fully public. Powerful stuff, Eliza said, removing her microphone. This is going to generate significant response. I know, Margaret replied quietly, but it needed to be said. When she checked her phone after leaving the studio, Margaret found dozens of missed calls and texts from Vivian, from Sophia, from foundation staff, from friends who'd watched the broadcast. But nothing from Bradley. She wasn't surprised. He would be consulting with his attorneys, figuring out his next move. But for the first time in months, Margaret felt she had the upper hand. The public exposure of his actions would make it much harder for him to pursue his agenda through legal channels. What she didn't expect was the call that came at 11 that night, as she sat in her study reviewing case files from the foundation. He's asked that you be notified. Margaret's heart raced. What kind of incident? Is Bradley hurt? No, ma'am. Your son is physically fine, but he's been taken into custody following a domestic disturbance. His wife called 911 reporting that he was destroying property and making threats. Tiffany called the police on Bradley? Margaret was stunned. Yes, ma'am. Mr. Thornhill is currently being processed on charges of domestic violence and making criminal threats. He's requested that you be contacted as he may need assistance with bail. Margaret sat in silence for a moment, processing this information. Thank you for letting me know, officer. Where is Tiffany now? She's chosen to go to a friend's home for the night. She declined emergency shelter services. After getting the details about Bradley's situation, Margaret hung up and immediately called Vivian. Bradley's been arrested, she said when her friend answered. Domestic violence and threats against Tiffany. She called the police on him. My God, Vivian breathed. Do you think this is related to your interview? It must be, The timing is too coincidental. He must have watched it and lost control. Margaret's voice shook slightly. Vivian, he's asking for help with bail. And what are you thinking? I don't know. Part of me wants to let him sit in jail overnight, to face the consequences of his actions. But another part still sees him as your little boy, Vivian finished gently. Yes. Margaret sighed. What would you do? Honestly, I'd wait until morning. Let him experience a night in custody. It might be the wake-up call he needs. And it gives you time to speak with Tiffany, to get her side of what happened. Margaret agreed with Vivian's advice. She sent a text to Tiffany, asking if she was safe, and if they could talk tomorrow. Then she tried to sleep, though rest proved elusive as she thought about her son spending the night in a jail cell. The next morning, Margaret met Tiffany at a quiet cafe near her friend's home. Tiffany looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes, and a slight tremor in her hands, as she sipped her coffee. Thank you for meeting me, Margaret said. I want to hear what happened, if you're comfortable sharing. Tiffany nodded, pushing her blonde hair behind her ears. Bradley watched your interview. He was drinking scotch, getting angrier with each minute. When it ended, he started throwing things: a vase, his glass, a chair. He was ranting about you betraying him, about how you'd ruined everything. Did he hurt you? Margaret asked gently. Not physically, but he threatened to, he said. Tiffany swallowed hard. He said he should have dealt with both of us differently from the beginning. That he'd take care of us once and for all. The way he said it scared me enough to call 911. I'm so sorry, Tiffany. Don't be. This has been building for years. Bradley's always had a temper, but it's gotten worse, as his financial problems have grown. The conservatorship scheme was his breaking point that became obsessed with getting your money. He's asked for my help with bail, Margaret said. I'm not sure what to do. Tiffany looked up sharply. Don't bail him out. Please. He needs to face consequences for once in his life. That's the only way he might finally change. Margaret studied her daughter-in-law's face, seeing the fear and exhaustion there. Are you planning to press charges? Yes. And I'm filing for divorce immediately. I've already called a lawyer. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Margaret reached across the table and took Tiffany's hand. You don't have to rush. I have a guest house on my property that's sitting empty. It has its own entrance and complete privacy. You're welcome to use it while you sort things out. Surprise flickered across Tiffany's face. Why would you help me? After everything that's happened? Because you had the courage to tell me the truth about Bradley's plans. Because you called the police when he became dangerous. And because, despite our distant relationship over the years, your family. Tears welled in Tiffany's eyes. Thank you. I might take you up on that. After their meeting, Margaret drove to the police station. She had decided not to post bail for Bradley, but she did want to see him, to understand his state of mind. The visitor's room was stark and institutional, with a glass partition separating inmates from visitors. Bradley looked terrible unshaven, his expensive shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his bloodshot eyes. When he saw Margaret, his expression hardened. I'm surprised you came, he said as they both picked up the phones to speak. I'm still your mother, Bradley. Are you? Mothers don't publicly humiliate their children on national television. And sons don't try to have their mothers declared incompetent for financial gain, Margaret countered. Or edit recordings to create false evidence. Or threaten their wives. Bradley's jaw tightened. Tiffany overreacted. I was upset, yes, but I never would have hurt her. She doesn't believe that, and neither do I, frankly. So you're not here to help with bail? Margaret shook her head. No. I think you need time to reflect on the choices that brought you here. Bradley's face flushed with anger. This is your fault. All of it. If you had just helped me when I needed it. This is not my fault. Margaret interrupted, her voice firm. Your financial problems are the result of your own poor decisions. Your marriage problems existed long before our current conflict. And your choice to try to seize control of my money rather than address your own issues, that was entirely your decision. So that's it? You're abandoning me when I need you most? Margaret paused, studying her son's face. "I'll ask you one question, and I want an honest answer. Do you understand that what you did trying to have me declared incompetent, recording our conversations without consent, editing those recordings to create false evidence was wrong?" Bradley stared at her for a long moment, then looked away. "I did what I thought was necessary." "That's not an answer. Do you believe your actions were wrong?" "I believe they were justified under the circumstances. Until then, you'll need to find your own way forward." She hung up the phone and stood, giving her son one last look before turning to leave. His expression was a mixture of anger and disbelief. Had truly expected her to rescue him, despite everything. In the following weeks, the full consequences of Bradley's actions unfolded. Tiffany filed for divorce and moved into Margaret's guest house. Bradley was released on bail paid by a business associate, but faced serious charges for the domestic incident. The district attorney was also investigating the possibility of charges related to the fabrication of evidence intended for court proceedings. The Thornhill Elder Justice Initiative continued to grow, taking on dozens of cases across the country and advocating for stronger legal protections for older adults. Margaret found purpose in this work, channeling her painful personal experience into helping others avoid similar situations. James extended his stay in California, taking a semester off from Northwestern to intern at the foundation. His presence was a balm to Margaret's heart, a reminder that family bonds could be based on genuine care and respect rather than financial interest. 3 months after Bradley's arrest, Margaret received an unexpected letter. The handwriting on the envelope was immediately recognizable, as her son's, the distinctive slant of his letters, the heavy pressure of his pen. She opened it with trembling fingers, unsure what to expect. "Dear Mother," it began. "I'm writing this letter from the rehabilitation facility where I've been for the past month. After my court-mandated anger management program, I voluntarily entered treatment for alcohol dependency and other issues that I've been unwilling to acknowledge for too long. I don't expect your forgiveness. What I did to you was unforgivable. I betrayed your trust in the most fundamental way, and I have no excuse for my actions. The therapists here have helped me see that my financial problems, my marriage failures, and my increasingly desperate behavior were all symptoms of deeper issues that I've refused to address. I was raised with privilege and never developed the resilience or work ethic that you and Dad exemplified. I came to see your money as an extension of my own resources, something I was entitled to rather than something you earned through decades of hard work. When you refused to bail me out yet again, I didn't see it as a reasonable boundary. I saw it as a betrayal of what I believed was my birthright. I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for legal help. I'm not even asking for reconciliation, as I understand that may never be possible given my actions. I'm simply writing to say that I am sorry, truly sorry, for the pain I've caused you. You deserved better from your son. Regardless of what happens between us, I want you to know that I admire what you've built with your foundation. The work you're doing matters, and it will help many people avoid the kind of predatory behavior that I myself displayed. With regret and respect, Bradley." Margaret read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. It was the first genuine acknowledgement of wrongdoing she'd heard from her son, in years perhaps ever. There was no manipulation, no subtle request for help, no attempt to minimize his actions, just accountability and remorse. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she shared the letter with Vivian, seeking her friend's perspective on its sincerity. "It reads as genuine to me," Vivian said, after carefully reviewing it. "The lack of excuses, the absence of requests, these suggest real reflection rather than strategic communication." "What should I do?" Margaret asked. "That depends on what you want, Margaret. Reconciliation is possible, but it would need to be on entirely new terms. Trust has been shattered, and would take years to rebuild, if ever. You're under no obligation to try." Margaret thought about it for several days. She discussed it with her therapist, whom she'd been seeing regularly since the conflict with Bradley began. She meditated in her garden, seeking clarity about her own needs and boundaries. Finally, she wrote a brief response. "Bradley, thank you for your letter. I appreciate your honesty and your willingness to take responsibility for your actions. That is an important first step. I need more time before I can consider what our relationship might look like in the future. For now, I wish you well in your recovery journey, and hope you find the peace and purpose that has seemed to elude you. Mother. 6 months later, the Thornhill Elder Justice Initiative celebrated its one-year anniversary with a gala fundraiser. The foundation had helped over 200 elders across the country retain their autonomy and financial independence. It had also successfully advocated for legislative changes in 3 states, strengthening protections against elder exploitation. Margaret stood at the podium, surveying the room filled with supporters, clients, staff, and media. Vivian sat at the front table, along with James, Sophia, and other board members. Tiffany, who had found unexpected fulfillment working in the Foundation's outreach department, managed the event with quiet efficiency. "A year ago," Margaret began, "I found myself in a situation I never imagined possible. My own son was attempting to have me declared incompetent to gain control of my finances. It was frightening, isolating, and deeply painful." She paused, making eye contact with audience members. But that experience, difficult as it was, revealed a widespread problem that affects thousands of older Americans. Elder financial exploitation is the crime of the 21st century, and it often comes from those we should be able to trust most, our own family members. Margaret outlined the Foundation's accomplishments and future goals, then concluded with a personal reflection. Age brings wisdom, perspective, and resilience. It does not diminish our right to make our own choices, to control our own resources, to live with dignity and autonomy. Through this foundation, we will continue to fight for these fundamental rights for all older Americans. As applause filled the room, Margaret noticed a figure standing at the back, partially obscured by a column. Bradley. He looked different, thinner, more subdued, his expensive suit replaced by simpler attire. He didn't approach her, didn't try to speak. He simply nodded once when their eyes met, then slipped out before the crowd dispersed. Later that evening, as Margaret prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about that brief moment of connection. Bradley's presence at the gala had been unexpected but not unwelcome. It suggested he was genuinely following her work, perhaps even supporting it in his own way. Their relationship remained fragile, limited to occasional brief messages and rare, carefully managed interactions. The trust that had been broken might never fully heal. But there was a new understanding between them, a recognition of boundaries, a respect for autonomy that had previously been absent. As she turned out her light, Margaret reflected on the journey of the past year. She had lost the illusion of unconditional family loyalty, but gained a clearer understanding of her own strength. She had experienced betrayal but also discovered unexpected allies. She had been forced to fight for her autonomy but found purpose in helping others do the same. At 69, Margaret Thornhill was not diminished by age, but empowered by it. She had weathered a storm that might have broken someone younger, less resilient. And in doing so, she had created a legacy far more meaningful than simply passing wealth to the next generation. She had shown her son and the world exactly how competent she really was.